Alright, it is time to wrap up Reddit Bingo of 2021. Don't worry, I am going to do my 2022 TBR and recommendations video. That will be coming out later this week, but I figured for some closure, some catharsis for myself mainly, I wanted to show my bingo board and talk about, what did I read for each of the prompts? How did I feel about doing the challenge? And generally, I really am proud of myself for finally doing it. I've been trying to do this challenge for years, and I just finally went and did it. And it's because, if you don't know, Reddit Bingo, it has very specific prompts, especially if you want to do hard mode. So sometimes you can't just accidentally fall into getting the entire bingo board. You actually have to actively look for books for certain prompts, which I think is actually really fun, especially if you have the whole year to do it. And I read about 120 books a year now, so having 25 of those books be dedicated to a bingo board isn't too bad for me. So let's get into it. The first square is short stories, and it could be 5 short stories for normal, and it was the entire collection. And I read so many short story collections. I have my 2021 video where I discuss all the short story collections I read that year, and the one I used for this square was New Sons. This is my favorite anthology. I have Storygraph and Goodreads where I go into my favorite stories from the anthology, but for me this was kind of the best in terms of it had the fewest misses for me, because there will always be misses in a short story anthology. I will be very surprised if I ever read an anthology where I'm like, yes, I equally love every story in here, because it's different authors, different authorial voices, different themes, etc. But this one I really enjoyed overall, the entire thing. I liked that it was short, so I wasn't getting overwhelmed by how many stories I was switching between, and I think the cover is really pretty. I think that's part of it. I really enjoy the cover, and I even bought myself a copy. The next square was a book set in an Asian-inspired environment, or Asia, and written by an Asian author for hard mode, and I chose The Bone Shard Daughter. My mom has recently read the sequel and is mad at me that I have not read the sequel yet, so she's really enjoying it. I had fun with the first book, but I haven't been itching to get to the sequel. I kind of want all 3 to be out, but I enjoyed it. It had a sort of hard magic system. The setting has a lot of islands that people travel between, so the whole nation is split into islands, and I enjoyed that. I thought that was really interesting and different from what I typically read, and I had fun with that. I liked 2 of the main perspectives. The third one I didn't love as much, and I think that was just part of it. It's I just didn't love everything I was reading, and it had a rebellion arc, which is fine, but I just didn't think the rebellion arc would, I don't know, it didn't have enough meat? I don't know. I'm excited for the sequel. I enjoyed the first book. We'll just leave it at that. And then the third one, I had to pick something from their A to Z genre guide, and it had to be by a BIPOC author, and this was perfect because my friend Rachel from Shades of Orange had recommended to me The Changeling by Victor Laval, and that was on the list. I'm like, cool, I have a copy of that. I need to read it. We're doing it. And I did, and I loved it. It's perfect, dark fairy tale for adults sort of thing. Definitely has some horror vibes, but it was definitely more like Pan's Labyrinth for me, if you've seen the movie. Not the same setting at all, but in terms of this is unsettling, but the right amount, and I don't know, I feel just the right amount of uncomfortable is essentially how I felt reading The Changeling. The fourth square was Found Family with an LGBTQ protagonist for hard mode, and I chose Chaos on Catnet. If you're new here, I love the Catnet series. It's a YA sci-fi thriller series that I really love. It's because of the Found Family. There are these clouders, this internet space where a bunch of these LGBTQ kids can get together and chat, and it's perfect for our main character who's having to constantly move across the country because they're running away from her dad. It's fantastic. It has a sapphic romance with the main protagonist, so it fits for this square. I have a review for it. It has my cat in it if you want to see my cat. Highly recommend. And then the last square for this row was first-person point of view, but it had to have multiple point of views to get hard mode, and I chose The Stars Are Legion because I really liked The Light Brigade by Cameron Hurley, so I really wanted to pick out this standalone sci-fi, and the setting is cool. It's squishy, it's gross, it had a lot of promise, it had an amnesia plot arc, so much promise. Really didn't work for me. I was really, really thoroughly bored. And I think part of it, now that I've been reading some first person this year that's not worked for me, is that I never got to connect to either of the characters that I was in their head for the entire book. I was very removed. I don't like a distant first person, personally. Next row, we start off with the fantasy book club pick. So Reddit has a lot of book clubs going on. They have a lot of read-alongs, book clubs, and I participated when they read The Master of Jinn, mainly because I wanted to read it, and also because I wanted to get this square in hard mode. And I like this story, but I don't love it. Primarily because it's just not my subgenre of fantasy. I think it actually accomplished its subgenre of fantasy well, which is kind of detective murder mystery fantasy sort of thing. It followed the tropes of that genre. But for me, I just don't love that as the intrigue, the moving forward portion of the plot. I loved the characters, I loved the setting, but I didn't care about what we were doing for 400 pages, which is kind of a bummer. But it was good, and I still want to read more by this author. I have actually a lot of novellas left to pick up by him. The next square is the new to you author. This was an author that you've literally heard nothing about, and I did do this. I went to my bookstore and I picked a book off the shelf that I hadn't heard about on Instagram or BookTube. I actually picked it for very shallow reasons. That's folklore. I picked it because the author's name is Angela, which is my name, and because the main character was a physicist. That's it. That's why I picked up this book. I knew nothing about it, and it's definitely more literary fiction with magical realism tones on it, so if you pick this up in the fantasy section of your bookstore, it is fantasy, but don't expect a traditional fantasy experience. It's more literary, contemporary, with some magical realism. I really liked it, though. This is a great, dealing with generational trauma story and learning the history of your parents' past, but also coming to terms with grief in the present. I enjoyed folklore. I'm really glad I picked it up and used it for this square. This next one was Gothic fantasy. I don't know what Gothic fantasy is. I think Hardmode was just not picking something off of this Riot blog list or something, so that was easy because I picked Summer Suns for this. Because this is for sure Gothic. I'm pretty positive. I still don't really know what Gothic is. But I'm pretty sure Summer Suns is it. And I actually really recommend it. I enjoyed, again, this is another book that really went into grief and what grief does to a person as they're going through it. Because our main character loses their best friend and now goes to the school where he was supposed to meet up with his best friend in grad school where they were supposed to live, and kind of unravels what happened to him. So there is this mystery undertone, and there's definitely some dark academia vibes. But it's mostly about exploring grief and toxic masculinity in the queer community. I really liked it. It was a book that took a while to grow on me, but I got very invested even with the weird pacing, because I wouldn't say this is a fast-paced book or anything like that. It's creepy and unsettling, but I don't think as horrifying as the cover would lead you to believe. But I recommend it, and it's definitely Southern Gothic, so I think it works. Next one was Backlist, and I think it's a currently publishing author's backlist book before 2000. I think I got this wrong when I made my TBR last year, but regardless, this book counts, and that's Lady of the Lake by, why don't I know the name of the guy who writes The Witcher? Andrzej Sapkowski. That just left my head. I read the entire Witcher series over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. I have a whole should you read review for that series. I love the short stories. I'm very mixed on the novels, especially this last book, but it counts. It was published originally in Poland in 1999. So it counts. And the next square was Revenge, and the hard mode was Revenge is the Plot, which is also tricky for me. I had so many books that I could have read, but I don't love revenge plot arcs. It's it has to be done super specifically. And I mean, the one I'm choosing isn't one that I love, but that's Ancillary Justice. It's a revenge plot arc. Our main character is out to seek revenge. That's the plot. It kind of takes a while for you to realize that, but that's the entire motivation of that story. So it works for this, but having mystery and revenge, those are two types of plot tropes that are really hard for me to get behind unless they're done very particularly. Third row, we have a mystery, and I think the mystery having to take place in a secondary world was the hard mode, and I chose Turning Darkness into Light by Marie Brennan because there is a mystery in this book, and it takes place in a world that is inspired by ours, kind of Victorian era, although this it's probably more closer to modern because Victorian's more Lady Trent, and I think this is 20 years after Lady Trent. Regardless, it counts. There's definitely a mystery in here. It's not our world, and I love it, so I used it for this square. I have a Lady Trent, should you read. If you want to know more about my thoughts on that series, I love it. That's the short answer. And the next square is a comfort read. And it's hard to pick a comfort read for this because the hard mode was not using a reread, and I truly know if something's a comfort read if I reread it. That's when I know. I can guess, but I know when I reread it. So this works because I think Sarah J. Maas is typically a comfort read for me, and it was the case for this one, and that's A Court of Silver Flames. I read it when I really needed to be comfortable and escape, and it worked for that. She is not always a comfort read, as I've learned recently, but in this case, it really worked. Although, I wish I could have used The Mask of Mirrors, which I did reread in 2021. I actually read twice in 2021, but it wouldn't have worked for hard mode. But just know that I know for sure a book I read last year that works is The Mask of Mirrors. Next square is published in 2021 and it's a debut, She Who Became the Sun. I have a whole review for this. It's actually probably my best performing review on the channel, which I was not expecting. I didn't do anything special in crafting that review versus my other ones. So I'll point you to that. I don't love this book as much as other people. I don't dislike this book as much as other people. I'm excited to get to the second book to finish the arc of this character because I do find this main character really compelling and I like the story we're being told. So yeah, I'm curious to know more. It's a really good debut, very solid. Cat Squasher is just read a book over 800 pages for Hardmode. I do that so many times. So I just picked The Mad Ship because I'm obsessed with the Live Ship Traders series, like obsessed. I have so many videos on the Live Ship Traders, okay? I have spoiler chats for all 3 books. I have a spoiler-free review for the first book and a spoiler-free series review and a Robin Hobb book tag. So if you want to know my opinions on the Live Ship Traders series, well, obviously I love it. But if you want specifics, go check those videos out. And the last one in this row is nonfiction. It had to be published in the last 5 years. I chose Disfigured. Really good introductory piece on disability and how it can come through specifically in fairy tales, but I found it useful in also looking through the fantasy and sci-fi that I read and when we put emphasis on things, because this is definitely my part as an able-bodied reader that is hardest for me to notice when I'm reading works. All right, second to last row, we have the Latinx author, and there had to be less than 1,000 ratings for the book for Hardmode. And the one I'm about to show you has way more than 1,000 ratings now, but I promise you was at 600 when I read it. And that's The Last Contista. I read this right before it won the Newbery, and then everyone was reading it because it won the Newbery, which is amazing. I'm so excited for this book. It is fantastic. I bought myself a copy. It's a Latina sci-fi main character in a sci-fi middle grade book, and I couldn't put this down. It was really lovely. Just completely transported me. I was so anxious. Like, this book was really anxiety-inducing based off the situation the characters put in. So I'm really glad that this prompt forced me to pick this, because I have already read a lot of the other Latinx SFF books that I want to read that are less than 1,000 ratings. So yeah, it was really hard. I had missed the boat with my arc of Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, which, now also has so many ratings, which, yay, and a lot of Anna Marie McLemore's already over. So I was getting desperate, but this one worked. The next one is self-published, and this one's always hard because I think it's less than 100 ratings, and I read Nine of Swords, which was a self-published book that I read, and I don't think it has that many ratings right now. I liked it, didn't love it. Yeah, that's basically it for that one. Okay, this next square was the last one I completed, and it was so hard, and that was Forest, and it had to be completely set in a forest setting, and that I chose The Queens of Renthia, the entire trilogy. I read the entire trilogy for this, actually. I'm only putting the first book, but this is the biggest winner, I feel, of this entire reading challenge, because I would not have picked this series up when I did if it wasn't for Bingo. I didn't feel called to it, and it was the perfect comfort fantasy situation. I loved it. I need to still get together my thoughts for like a review video or something, but I completely fell into listening to these stories. I was listening to it in February when I was preparing for my defense, and I did not expect to love it as much as I did, but man, did I love this series. Genre mashup is the next one, having 3 or more genres. I read a lot of genre mashup stuff, so I wasn't too worried about this square, but I put The Ninth Reign here because I read the entire Winnowing Flame trilogy last year, have a series review for that, and it definitely works. You got sci-fi, you got horror, you got fantasy. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a genre mashup. That's kind of the coolest part of it, is you get a lot of cool cinematic sword and sorcery fantasy, but in this like very unique setting. It's really cool. The next one's chapter in the titles, and it had to be more than one word for Hardmode, which is difficult. And it had to be every chapter. It couldn't just be like one of them accidentally had one word, because I was going to use a Wheel of Time book for this, but it wasn't working. So I used Percy Jackson, book number 2, and it works. And so that's what I don't have any really strong thoughts on Percy Jackson. It's a middle grade series that my sibling loves, so I'm going to slowly consume them all, because one of the closest people in my life loves this series. That's what I do. All right, last row. This is the one that's supposed to be the blank of something, I don't know. And I did The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Niveau. It worked for this. So yeah, if I hadn't already used A Court of Silver Flames for the other one, I could have used House of Sky and Breath. So I'm sure I could have moved stuff around with all the books I've read. But I love this novella, and I love its sequel novella, so it deserved to be here. It's really good, and I can't wait for the third one. And I need to read other Niveau works, like I have The Siren Queen on my TBR, but that's what I chose for this. I did talk about this more in a vlog I did last year for the Asian Readathon, so I will link that down below if you want more thoughts. This next one is kind of like the first-person point of view one, where it got something off my TBR that I've had on it forever, but it wasn't a success, and this is First Contact that doesn't lend itself to a war. And this is Lagoon by Nnedi Okorafor. And this is probably my least favorite. I didn't like it. I don't know. I just didn't connect to the characters. I don't think it was bad. Like, I mean, me not liking it was not because it was, like, trash writing or anything like that. It was more just everything moved so fast, and I wasn't able to latch onto characters. And when I realized it was inspired by a movie, I was like, oh, this would make a great movie. I would have loved this movie. And I think that was just the problem, is I wasn't in the headspace for really action-packed, purely plot-driven sci-fi, and that's just what this ended up being. With, like, me not understanding how character relationships were progressing as quickly as they were. I was just like, I don't know. It wasn't just insta-love. It was just, I couldn't understand what was happening. And also, although it's kind of short and it was fast-paced, it felt too long for me. So I just had issues with this book in general. Next up was trans or non-binary, and the character, like the main character, would be trans or non-binary for Hardmode. And I chose Blanca y Roja for this. I also had the Tensert series where I read the first book, but I wanted to make sure it was a novel because you're not supposed to use too many novellas. And so this one of the 4 main characters is non-binary. So it works for that. Paige is great. I really like this. If you want a kind of fairy tale story retelling for the fall, I highly recommend it. The atmosphere, the ambiance, the vibes, really great. Next up's a debut author who didn't ask me anything on Reddit, and I chose The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke, my personal favorite in the Sapphic trifecta. And yeah, I really loved this. I wasn't expecting to either because this doesn't have my fantasy tropes. It's low magic military fantasy. Those are not my buzzwords. And so I read it for a book club because I had a copy and we needed to read it for book club. And I think I loved it the most. I love terrain. I like watching Luca. I don't love Luca. If you've read the book, you understand. And I'm really excited for the second book. I think we're almost done with edits, and maybe not end of this year, but soon. Like 2023 is not that far away, right? I can get the second book, and it's going to be fantastic. And the last one is Witches, and I chose Wild Seed for this by Octavia Butler. I don't think this is a stretch. Frequently, our main character is referred to as a witch in this book, and so that's what I'm going to go with for this. But that is the wrap-up of this bingo. I'm really glad I did it. I do think it really helped me focus my reading. I can never really participate in like the week-long readathons that have the very specific prompts because I just can't read that many books in a week, and I don't normally have that many books on my TBR that's like accessible to me. So when I can do like a full year where I have really specific prompts, it's like it's more attainable and it's more fun, and I like can get my spreadsheet together, and I just love the interactive bingo card. When I do my TBR and recommendations, I will have that linked, what I use below there as well, so you have access to that. So look forward to that in the future. Let me know if you participated last year and how you did. Are you going to participate this year? We definitely talk about it all the time in my Discord, so if you're looking for book recommendations, if you're looking for a bunch of people doing yearly goals, that's us. And if you want to leave an emoji, I don't know. Leave like the number 2021, like the, all the block numbers maybe. I don't know. Leave whatever you want. I will leave this up to you guys. I won't give you a specific prompt. And if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.